Hey everyone, my name is Jay and welcome back to another video. Today I wanted to talk about a semi-controversial topic, that being 3D animation in anime. So before I get started, I wanted to mention that I actually have a degree in 3D animation, so I'm actually familiar with how things work, and I kind of know the pros and cons of doing animation drawn versus CG, and I was trained as a generalist, so I'm not actually like an animator, I do a lot of stuff. Anyways, back to the video. So after I go through a few common questions I've heard, I'll give my ultimate opinion on whether or not anime should use 3D, and I'll try to be as unbiased as possible. Obviously, I'll be a little biased because I know a little bit more than other people when it comes to the basics of this kind of stuff. I guess we'll see. So with that out of the way, let's get to the first question I hear most people toss around. Why do studios use CG in the first place? Shows have been hand-drawn for years, so why change? So before I answer this question, I think I need to make a few disclaimers first. I don't actually mind CG anime. I think that it can be done well, and if it's done correctly, it can look really beautiful. And I should also say that most anime you watch today has some CG in one form or another. You might hate it, but I can almost guarantee that most of the anime made in the last decade or so has some elements of CG in it in one way or another. It can be as small as a skybox or background buildings, or as big as an actual set or key props the protagonist uses, or hell, even the characters can be CG depending on the show. So keep that in mind when you say CG in anime is bad. So let's get started with some of the pros of doing a production in CG. First, things like perspective, depth, and lighting are much easier to keep consistent and looking good. Characters will generally stay on model unless a rig is made to go off model. And you might be wondering, why is lighting so important? Well, lighting is incredibly important because although it is hard to point out when lighting is messed up, our brains will usually pick up on it and get disoriented even if we don't consciously perceive it. So CG fixes that because all you have to do is slap a light in the scene and there you go. The light will always be pointing in that one direction. When you're hand drawing, sometimes new animators will get mixed up with where the light source is, and sometimes they don't know where the light source is, so they make it up and it's different, and it can be disorienting sometimes when the light doesn't work how it's supposed to in the real world. Also, cinema techniques like depth of field and camera angles become much more fluid. If you don't like a shot as it is, you can easily move the camera around to accommodate a new angle, something that is much harder to do traditionally. The next strength, in my opinion, is the ability to give more dynamic angles, at least in theory. Building off the last point, artists are usually limited by their time and skills. Some angles on the human body are much harder to draw than others. So we see anime usually giving us the same 4 angles or so on a face with little to no movement in between those, face positions. It's to save time and it makes everything much easier. CG makes it so that you can make one beautiful model, and now we can look in this model in every single direction, and it will always look good and as you intended. CG makes things much easier when it comes to complex scenes and or movements, especially with non-organic objects. So in CG, you can make models which will always stay to scale unless you animate them otherwise. This helps companies with short turnarounds get a ton of assets out quickly, instead of hand drawing a car turning, which would essentially include 24 hand-drawn frames each second, as most media we watch is 24 frames per second. An artist only needs to make one CG car, rig it, shade it, and then animate it. This car will always stay perfectly aligned and it will never be distorted, which can happen in some hand drawings where things aren't exactly lined up each frame. It's very hard work. I believe mecha anime specifically has been using CG models more than other genres to maintain hard edges on their models and make sure the robots don't look too rubbery, which can happen sometimes when you're drawing in smear frames and all that stuff. CG can theoretically also make animations more fluid as well. When you hand draw, when you want a leg to go up, you need to draw a few frames of animation to get the leg up, To create that illusion of movement, you actually need to draw frames in between. However, in CG, you can technically have the computer interpolate the positions you key so the leg moves up automatically from one position to another. It's usually recommended to give some in-betweens, as the computer sometimes does a terrible job, but for a quick animation, it can usually be fairly seamless to the viewer. And I'll give a little bit example of this on screen. This is a model that I made. I keyed it once with his wrist up and once with his wrist down. That's all I did. I just rotated it, and all of those in-between frames were done by the computer. I didn't have to do any of that. CG also helps with things like perspective, which I know most artists, myself included, hate doing. Because in CG, when you make a building and you put a camera, it will automatically do the perspective for you. You don't have to do all the lines and stuff. It basically does the work for you. Some assets can even be reused from production to production. So take a traffic scene or maybe even a street scene for example. All you have to do is make 1 to 4 variations of a car, slap different textures on those bad boys, and now you have every car you will need. And you would think, oh no, there's no way I would notice this. I would notice if there were just 4 variations of car. But you would be really shocked to know how many things are copied and pasted and just changed slightly, just tweaked slightly in most productions, and you will never notice. And finally, one of the biggest uses of CG anime that I know of is Vocaloid and other music-related anime productions. Instead of having to animate a full dance complete with lip syncing and effects, all those complex movements that dances have, you can just motion capture it. You make a character, you rig it, like I said before, and if you aren't aware what rigging is, it's essentially putting the skeleton into the base model mesh that allows it to move. So when you just make a model, it's just a model. It's like a clay sculpture. But then if you were to put like a metal, maybe like a rod inside of it, now you can bend the arm and it looks like you can bend it back and forth and pose it and whatnot. So that's what rigging is. I keep on throwing that word around. I just wanted to kind of give some context to that. So anyways, you bring in actual dancers. They do the motion capture for you. All you have to do is slap that animation onto the character, and there you go. You've just animated a full dance sequence complete with lip syncing, depending on what kind of production you use. And I have done motion capture before, and let me tell you, it is almost that easy. Like, there's a little bit more technicality to it, but it is so much faster than having to do it by hand. It has become a staple to use a CG cutscene for a dance and a music number in shows like Love Live and whatever, and that mainly boils down to how easy and accurate it is compared to other methods. There are a ton of tricks animators have found to decrease working time and increase productivity. So that kind of explains the why. Animators are on tight schedules, and creating a CG object once can help out for many episodes to come and allow animators to spend their time on the stuff people actually care about. Seriously, backgrounds are annoying to draw, and instead of having the background in anime where you see sometimes where it's just flat and you can tell the characters are clearly drawn on top of it and the background never changes and moves, and you know which part of the background is going to be like animated because it's a different color. That happens all the time in older animes. Well, now you don't have to do that, because if it's in CG, you just draw on top of the CG and you can move perspective of the background whenever you want. And it can stay the same textures, and you don't have to redraw those buildings hundreds of times. I'm getting a little bit into the weeds here, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to my next point, but seriously, it does help a production out a whole ton. So now you might be asking yourself, wow, this all sounds great on paper, but we all saw Berserk and we know it looked awful. If CG has so many inherent strengths, why does it still look like crap? By the way, I just want to add here that Berserk is one of my most beloved series of all time, so I'm not shitting on it just because I hate it. I truly love the series. The next question I've heard is, why is CG anime so bad? Or more realistically, why do they use CG in anime when it looks so bad? And this is where the video starts to go into speculation and my own personal opinion about these subjects. So first off, I think the main reason why any show looks bad is because they didn't put enough time into it. The animation industry is built upon doing things quick and dirty. That's why films usually look so much better. They get paid way more, and they have much more time to make everything look good. Weekly shows don't get the same luxury, and they have to cut corners and save costs wherever they can. This same principle applies to live action television versus film as well. Look at the Flash TV show. Cool effects, and CG is alright, but you can clearly tell it's CG. Now look at the Flash in Justice League. And I know, you have to watch some Justice League, my bad. See how different it looks? Almost night and day. Now apply this to anime. CG can look good. It's just usually they are either given not enough time or not enough budget. You can say they should have spent more time on the main character, but that's all in hindsight, and it's mostly wrapped up in greed. If a production company sees a way to save a buck, they'll usually take it. It's a business after all. Most companies aren't making anime to satisfy you personally. they know they'll still probably get a decent viewer rate for big enough shows, and so what's the big deal? The second and most important reason for why I think anime shows keep failing is because they're trying to replicate something that it isn't made for. Manga to drawn anime is so seamless because there's a clear continuation or evolution, per se. It goes from printed paper to digital drawing or some form of older animation with cameras and all that fun stuff. There's a clear through line. Somebody drew it on paper and now somebody drew it for your screen. The show will look like the manga and people are happy to see their favorite series look exactly as it did on the page, but now moving and in color. CG is a relatively new concept into the realm of animation, and it does not directly draw on anything other than the real world. It uses math to make the models come to life. There's kind of a disconnect that viewers have in this moment that leads most to reject CG. You see drawn manga, and now you see a model in CG that somebody sculpted. It's not the same. I think that it's a poor imitation for hand drawing, and it can only ever look so good before you realize you're not watching a drawing and you're watching CG. This usually happens when a character turns their face in the middle of a frame. It's disorienting because you're so used to seeing the nose from one angle that when it turns, it's freaky because the lighting gets weird, the shading gets weird, and you realize, oh god, this is 3D. This is not a drawing. And I really don't think there's anything wrong with watching CG. I'm a CG artist and I love it to death. But I also don't like pretending it's something that it's not. I think more CG anime should try to accept more of this style of CG and stop trying to become something it's not. I know I said that twice now because it's important. Use the strengths of the medium to enhance the source material instead of trying to replicate the styles of traditional media. Don't try to make a hand-drawn anime in CG, try to make a CG anime. And those seem like they're the same thing, but I don't think they are. I think true CG at its best can look amazing, and it can look as good or better than any hand drawing. But I don't think that trying to make CG look like a hand drawing will ever look as good as a hand drawing. And there are exceptions to this. I think Dragon Ball FighterZ is universally loved, and it generally uses the same process I've described here today, and it looks amazing. I'm not saying it can't work, I just think that in most cases they don't give it enough time. And maybe this leads you to the conclusion that the two shouldn't have a relationship and CG and weekly anime should not be intertwined. And I would understand that conclusion. However, I personally would disagree. I think there can be good CG anime. I just don't think it will be what people want in the end. We like seeing hand drawings move around because that's how it was in the manga. We like seeing that through line. And I've heard all of it, you know. I've heard that drawings have more personality or they're more heartfelt. I completely disagree with the sentiment that CG cannot have personality or feels lifeless. You watch Wall-E or Up and you tell me with a straight face that doesn't hit you right in the core. My point of the whole video is this. I don't think CG in anime is bad. What I think is bad is when shows try to cut corners and try to pretend it's something it's not. Embrace the CG. Embrace what you can do with the medium and make something truly awesome. And of course, we'll still get bad CG shows. There's plenty of bad CG shows and CG movies and live action and whatever, but there's also plenty of bad hand-drawn shows too. And believe me, I've seen a few of them. I believe there will always be a place for traditional animation and CG. So don't worry about CG completely destroying the medium. I think there will always be a need from viewers to see hand drawings, and there will be a market for CG as well. At the end of the day, everyone will have their preference, and that's completely fine. I know you might be disappointed if your favorite show uses bad CG, but I'm sure someday we'll get a show that we can all love in CG. Probably not, but you know, here's to hoping. So like I've been doing recently, I want to try and recommend you guys some CG anime that I like, or, you know, I try to recommend anime about the video, but yeah, let's talk about some things that I like. I think that you should check out Berserk Part 1, 2, and 3 if you're okay with like rated R stuff. If you're not, like, don't watch that. That can be super triggering for a lot of people. So that one's a little on the side. That one's, if you're an adult, check that one out. I would also recommend some of the Ghost in the Shell stuff. That's pretty good. Also, that Dragon Quest movie that came out, I thought that looked amazing. It looked lovely. And I think that you could probably get some enjoyment out of Ajin. I think it looks pretty good. I don't really see the issues with it. I mean, like, you know, I see the issues, but I don't think it's as bad as everybody says. And I think these shows that I just recommended to you can kind of show you the difference between doing it in an anime style and doing it in a CG style with characters that look like anime characters. It's a hard distinction, but if you watch some clips and stuff, I'm sure you'll understand. But yeah, anyway, that's it for me, guys. Hopefully this video wasn't too long or too opinionated or too crazy. It's just something that I kind of have some knowledge on. And I'm thinking about doing some actual CG videos in the future where I show you kind of the process of doing some things, maybe even making my own anime character, seeing what I can do to try and make a good anime character, but, you know, we'll see. With that all being said, thanks for watching this far into the video, and I will hopefully see you in the next one.